An interesting offseason lies ahead in Toronto as Cheryl Pounder and Craig Button join us now. And yesterday, the Leafs core four all said that they want to stay in Toronto. But Kyle Dubas says that if he's back, he would consider anything, which is very different from his previous stance on numerous occasions when he has said that he's not going to trade any one of those core four players. But if a core four shakeup is needed, who should it be?
Well, let's make an assumption here first. We're assuming that Austin Matthews stays.
Yes.
He's the linchpin of this team. He is their best player. He's a superstar. We all know what he's done. So we're going to make the assumption that he is staying here. We're not going to get Austin Matthews into this mix. So let's make that assumption right off the bat. So then where do you go? And I'm going to say this too. Everybody says just because John Tavares has a no-trade clause, you can't trade him. Well, Ryan McDonagh got traded from the Tampa Bay Lightning. Not an easy conversation to have. But don't tell me what you can't do. I'm not telling you it's going to be easy. But I'm not trading William Nylander. I can tell you that. So what are you going to do? You're going to start looking at what the market is for Mitch Marner. But it's not just Mitch Marner that becomes part of this. What do you need on your team? And I think they need a second-line center and perhaps a defenseman that can give them some really big minutes on that back end. That's what I'd be looking for, and then now that's what you explore.
Well, you know that I'm going to say they need a big, solid defender back there just to shore up their defense where they need to be a little bit stronger. But I think that Nylander and Marner could both be on the block here. I agree with you with Austin Matthews. When you look at this guy, unless it was smoke and mirrors, like I said earlier, if he wants to be back, I think that you have to find a way to bring Austin Matthews back. But the reality of it is that the recipe isn't right. So something has to change. And you know, you've built teams, how important it is to build that magic recipe. And you got to get into a rhythm, and you have to find a way to support one another. And yes, you know that Mitch Marner is one of those guys. He is a Selke candidate. He's a 100-point player. But I do believe that they need a little more moxie up front. They've gone and they've acquired guys at the deadline that have brought, that physical element, but they haven't brought it to those top two lines, right? So that's what I'm looking at. You see it on the third line. You see it on the fourth line. So all of their acquisitions have helped that depth, but I think the real guys that have needed it, the ones that you've really searched for it for, belong on your top two lines, and they are on your top two lines, right, Craig? So you got to find some moxie, and you see the Kachucks of the world. You need someone to get in there to open up space for those guys that play with a little more finesse.
Yeah, so it's this big. I'll go back to the Tampa Bay Lightning. So they traded JT Miller to the Vancouver Canucks for a first-round pick. What ultimately ended up happening, they had all that skill. They ended up Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow. And that became a real strong part of their team playing along with Yanni Gourde. So it's not just, it's players that can make a difference. In my ideal world, I wish Dylan Cousins was available. Yeah. I wish Pierre-Luc Dubois was available. That's the type of player that I'm looking for on my team. You're not getting Dylan Cousins, but that's the type of player I'm looking for on my team. You'd love to have somebody that can drive play in a significant way. You're not getting Brady Tkachuk. You're not getting Matthew Tkachuk, but you got to look at what solidifies your team. And it's not just one area, but it's got to be in areas that are critically important to winning.
And you've got to get away from this notion that I need that same skilled player back, because you're not going to get a Mitch Marner back. It's what you need to fill the void on your team to be successful as a group. So you have to look at it with a different microscope, a different lens, if you want to attempt to find that recipe. Because guess what? They've been baking the same cake for a while, right? It's got to change.
Let me just add one more thing.
Quickly.
And I know in management too, as a manager and in management, you have all these grand ideas in your head, and you sit there and you go, oh yeah, we can make this trade. The problem is when you phone your counterparts and they tell you, that's an idiotic suggestion. So all these great ideas, remember, you can think about what you're doing. And Cheryl, you make an awesome point about stop thinking about getting something equal for Mitch Marner in terms of skill, because there's very few players like him. It's about what your team needs to be better.
So let's explore that a little bit with John Tavares, because he has a no-trade clause. He's the only one of the core four that has that no-trade clause right now. So, when you're making those phone calls, or if you're the general manager, what are you thinking about doing with John Tavares right now?
Well, the first thing you're doing is understanding where would he fit on your team under ideal circumstances. That's the first point. He's a winger. To me, he's a winger. He's got to play on the wing now. And that doesn't come as a surprise to me. When they signed him back in 2018, I felt at the back end of that contract that's where he could move and be on the wing. But you need a centerman. You need a really good centerman in that second hole that can play. But you think it was easy for Julien Brisebois to go and sit down and talk to Ryan McDonagh after he's just been a key part of 2 Stanley Cup victories and another trip to the Stanley Cup final? They aren't easy.
Yeah.
But that may be the conversation that you have to have. What I would say is, again, back to the manager. You got to have somebody that's ready to have that conversation in a serious way.
Yeah.
And lay it out. You're not trying to squeeze somebody. You're saying, hey, here's where we're headed. You got to include him in the conversation, but you can't just say no just because he has a no move clause.
Yeah, and I would be under the understanding that he is not likely going anywhere. But you're right, Craig. When you look at this Toronto Maple Leafs team, too, everyone's talking about the speed and the skill. Well, I don't really see the speed from top to bottom throughout their lineup. So I agree with you. I don't think that second line was a real threat. And everyone's saying, oh, these top two lines are so effective. And I don't think so. I think that, when you're matching up against a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs, it was actually pretty easy to get a line match to try and shut down. So if you move him to the wing, it doesn't mean that he can't be effective in the dot or on the power play net front, all of the areas where he is very effective. He's strong. He's hard on the puck. He likes to fight for the middle of the ice, but you're going to have to make a shift. And that's also a shift in the mindset around what this group can bring you, because at the end of the day, Marner and Matthews, they're here. They're the first two, right? When we're talking core four, let's talk about expectations. Then there's John Tavares.